We are Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14, presented by Stakes, doing our power rankings going into week 8. How do we get to week 8? It's crazy. It has gone
Well,
by
Chris, here's what
quickly.
happened. Week 1 went to week 2. Week 2, just kidding.
I didn't mean that
I know, no,
literally.
you're right. It was it has been a quick season to this point, but time flies when you're having fun.
As always, we start at the bottom, and the bottom is pretty clearly defined, has been for a while. The bottom two teams in our power rankings meet this week, and this was the easiest decision in our countdown because the number 13 team in our rankings, the Missouri Tigers, are a 14.5-point favorite over the number 14 team, Vanderbilt, which even for Vanderbilt has been bad lately. This is a game in Columbia Saturday that I don't know that anybody's looking forward to watching. That might include the two fan bases.
Well, we've already talked about it for 10 minutes, so I don't feel the need to talk about it anymore. If you're watching this now, the Vanderbilt Missouri preview is up. Please go watch it there because I don't think we're going to really spend a lot of time on it here. But yeah, I think pretty clearly to this point. I don't even want to say clearly because I assume a lot of our individual, again, this is composite staff ranking, not just me and Chris, for any of the new people out there. We do this for our entire staff. Everyone sends in their individual rankings. We combine them together for a composite. I was wondering if maybe some people would put Missouri maybe ahead of like an Auburn, but I think Auburn played better against Ole Miss, and I'm not surprised that maybe they wind up there. So yeah, 13 and 14, but I think the pretty clear gap, like you said, Vegas thinks that the 13 team is a couple touchdowns better than the 14 team, and even with the home field advantage factored in there. So not ideal probably for the Commodores right now.
By the way, Missouri and Vandy have both shown flashes at times. I mean, Vandy is 3-4.
Yeah, but I mean,
but it's been ugly lately. Missouri's defense, we've talked about it. Look, I'm trying to put a little bit of a positive spin on this here.
I get it.
And there is a big difference in the computers between these two teams. Missouri is probably, a bowl level team in a lot of conferences. But anyway, you see them around 60 in a lot of computers. But anyway, I ramble. Auburn, number 12, probably by virtue of beating Missouri in a game nobody wanted to take a few weeks ago. Auburn discovered an offense this weekend. The bad news for the Tigers is the defense completely came apart at the same time. It gave up, 450 rushing yards roughly to Ole Miss. South Carolina occupies the 11th spot where it seems to have been for a while. But the Gamecocks a shot to maybe move up in the coming weeks, playing some teams in front of them. And it seems like Florida has been in that 10 spot for a while too, Blake, which is where the Gators are again this week.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if some people even thought about putting South Carolina ahead of Florida. I didn't, but like we said, I think the thing with South Carolina is they're obviously going to move. I would expect them to move up if they win this week against A&M. We said it before. We said it last week, right? It's just the Kentucky win, and how do you compare that maybe to some of the other teams ahead of them? Based on the fact that Levis didn't play and all that, but also South Carolina had a week off, so there probably wasn't a lot of people on our staff. I'm looking at some of the rankings here that moved them up all that much. So there were a couple people I think that had them a little higher. But yeah, so I mean, this is probably kind of what you expect here. I don't think there's a lot of separation at this very moment between those kind of teams because again, we keep saying it right. We have to go all the way back to week 1, but Florida does want to win over Utah, who that's looking better and better at this point, and South Carolina again beats a Kentucky team who got back on track last week. So both teams in a, not exactly where you want to be right this second, but I think clearly have an opportunity to maybe move forward, although Florida coming off that loss to LSU.
Here's the area where it gets a little foggier. We've got A&M at 9. Could argue the Aggies could be higher. I think that Carolina game will have a lot of say in how the Aggies rank, obviously, next week. Followed by Arkansas at 8. The Razorbacks have been a lot higher, kind of bottomed out, have gotten a little healthier, got a big win against BYU this weekend. There was some debate on this, and remember, A&M did beat Arkansas in Arlington, so perhaps we should have had that reversed. But in any case, that's how the vote went. Arkansas at 8, A&M at 9.
Yeah, but like we say, and I'm not saying this to but it gets tricky when you're in week 8 and you're playing the head-to-head game. Like, it's more
Yeah.
than that, and I get we have to factor that in. I completely understand that, but, um, I can't say I'm shocked that maybe Arkansas gets moved ahead here, although, like, it's something else too, Chris. It's like, we talk about value, and A&M is one play away from beating Alabama on the road, and, but before that, they lose at Mississippi State just like Arkansas did, and so maybe if you do the head-to-head, it's fine, and I don't know. It is a hard game to play, like we say in these power rankings, and I don't, you're like, well, what if there's not a lot of separation between these two teams? Then why wouldn't you put the team that beat the other team? I think that's a hard game to play when you've played as many games as these teams have. But I guess I'm not surprised to see A&M fall below Arkansas here. I think Arkansas certainly probably got a little bump getting KJ Jefferson back and just getting off the schneid there, getting a win at BYU. But like we said, I think if A&M wins at South Carolina this week, even with Arkansas on the bye, I wouldn't be surprised if some people on our staff moved A&M ahead next week, and you kind of flip these based on that. So, yeah, it's just it's so hard. Like we said, the head-to-head game. Once you get to this point, it's hard to play sometimes.
Yeah, well, we're going to run into a lot of that coming up shortly in our countdown. But first, quick word from our sponsor, Stakes. That is Stakes. College football season is well underway. The best place to make your sports predictions without risking your bankroll is Stakes. Predict anything in the game. Take the game time excitement to the next level when you compete with your friends and other fans on the Stakes app. During the weekly competitions, you can build your predictions track record by winning competitions, and earning NFT trophies for making the perfect calls. Go to playwithstakes.com/14. Use the invite code Southeastern14 for a double welcome bonus. Free to join, free to play, lots of fun, and use that welcome code and follow our account at Southeastern14 so you can make your picks for us or against us with whatever we pick. Okay, number 7, the Mississippi State Bulldogs, who have had a very up and down season, were very disappointing in Lexington this weekend. The offense did not show up, although that probably had a lot to do with Kentucky's defense. Anyway, we've got the Bulldogs at 7, and news not great for Mississippi State. It's got Alabama coming up this weekend in Tuscaloosa, an opponent that it has just gotten obliterated by in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, clearly Mississippi State with a lot of potential to move up if it wins at Alabama, but also the potential, like we said, to maybe keep sliding down a little bit, depending on what happens with the teams behind them. We mentioned Arkansas is off, A&M, and of course Mississippi State's beaten both of those teams, which again makes the head-to-head a little tricky depending on what happens in Week 8. But yeah, you said it, Chris. I mean, we talked about A&M. Obviously, we're able to bounce back after that loss to LSU, but then go and lose to Kentucky, and now get to get the reward of having to go to a probably pretty angry Alabama team. So schedule not ideal right this second for Mississippi State, especially coming off that loss here to Kentucky.
Okay, here's an interesting one. LSU's been up and down. The Tigers are 5-2, as is State. And how different does LSU's season look now if it just takes care of business on special teams and handles Florida State in that opening week game?
Yeah, I look. So LSU 6. I had them at 6 in mine too, individual rankings. Like and when I looked at it, I'm like, I had to think for a second. I'm like, is this where? Yeah, but like this, I think this is right. Like I think you look at them, and I think you could even see some people argue maybe that argument against Kentucky, although Kentucky bounced back with a big win against Mississippi State. But I just think this LSU team, like we keep saying, is from game one to where they are now, there has just been, significant improvement. Have there been some stretches? First half against Auburn, obviously the Tennessee game, yes, but I just think with what Jaden Daniels is doing, we talked about, Booty's back and all this other stuff. Like they're getting a lot more. I think that cohesion is there now for LSU. And I know that's maybe strange to say at times coming off of, a 27-point home loss to LSU. And now they get another, they get a top 10 team here against Ole Miss coming up. And oh, yeah, Chris, then the following week, they're going to get another top team in Alabama, unless Alabama loses to Mississippi State. So a big window of opportunity here for LSU. And again, you talk about how different it could be if they just win that opening game and where they're sitting right now, which would just be a loss to Tennessee, which the way it happened, not great, but nothing to frown about. Losing to what is now the number 3 team in the country, and now with 2 top 10 teams coming in and a chance to there you go. You want to see where LSU is at in week 8, where they could be in week 10 of our power rankings? Could be a significant rise for them if they're able to win one or both of these games.
By the way, scoring margins for these 3 teams right here. And if you want to go back one more, Arkansas is 0.1 ahead in per game scoring margin. Mississippi State 13.6, LSU plus 12.4, and then our number 5 team, Kentucky, plus 10.0. By the way, Kentucky's also played the weakest schedule of these 3 teams here. That's LSU, Mississippi State. I think they're all kind of in that group, in my mind, together. Our pollsters, though, have Kentucky as the best team of the bunch of those 3 and checking in at number 5 overall.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that too, because I mean they get a bump, right, just from beating Mississippi State, and I
Right.
think a lot of people, like we said, a lot of people came in thinking this could kind of be the wrong direction for Kentucky in terms of coming off, the Levis injury, South Carolina loss, all that. Losing that game to Ole Miss, and you just wonder if things are starting to backtrack. But getting that win, your confidence grows a bit more now in Kentucky moving forward. That's exactly what they needed. They came out and took care of business, and so yeah, have a bit more confidence in seeing Kentucky this high in our rankings, because, like we keep saying, as of right this second, there's a clear top 4. I think, without question. I mean, you're talking about 4 top 10 teams nationally, so it was just a matter of who was going to fall in this 5 spot, and I'm not surprised to see Kentucky, from our individual rankings, get the boost back up here after the win against Mississippi State.
Well, and here's where our staff was pretty clear. There wasn't a lot of ambiguity here in the pecking order. Ole Miss coming in number 4 overall. The Rebels plus 23.6 in scoring margin, plus 157 in yards, averaging almost 2 yards a play, 1.99 more, plus 3 in turnovers. A lot to like at the Rebels. But as we have noted, as the schedule's gotten tougher and the Rebels have played the easiest one in the league, the margin for domination or whatever is gotten less. I mean, Ole Miss, I guess, a good way. It's been a little less impressive in wins lately than it was when it was playing the easier portion of the schedule at the first of the year.
Well, if they go in Baton Rouge, let's quiet all the conversation, because I think
Yeah.
that's a tough road game, like we said, against a surging LSU team. Which, by the way, I'm gonna turn this back to LSU. Chris, you do realize that we talked about the schedule for LSU. LSU wins out. They're your representative for the SEC West in the
Yeah. Wow.
SEC championship game. So, because again, they do have, like we talked about, they have Ole Miss and Alabama both coming up next. So, it's kind of a fascinating thing to think about. So, but a long way to get there for that, because they are facing an Ole Miss team, as we said, that as I think they just ran for another 500 yards here in the past 13 minutes since we've been recording this. So just can run the ball on anybody. We'll see if they can do that against LSU. But I keep saying we can talk about the schedule and all those things. And I've even seen people argue that Ole Miss should be ahead of Alabama. But the fact is, Ole Miss has beaten everybody on their schedule at this point, and that's all you can do. And they've been pretty impressive at times in doing so. So we'll see what they can do this week against LSU. But if they can notch that win, just keep adding another for the Rebels.
Okay, number 3 is Alabama, which seems strange to say, and everybody's a little bit down on Alabama. But let me just give you some numbers to put the Crimson Tide in perspective here of how good this team still really is. Kenneth Massey has got Alabama having played the number 1 strength of schedule in the country. I couldn't disagree with that more, but that's what his computer has. Jeff Sagarin's got Alabama at 18. Scoring margin, Alabama plus 26.9. Yardage margin, Alabama plus 217. That's the second highest in the league. Per play, Alabama still has the largest margin in the league, plus 2.94 per play. Now, here's the problems for Alabama. -4 in turnovers and 80 penalty yards a game, which is the worst in the league. Alabama has just been very un-Alabama-like with the penalties and, of course, the defense against Tennessee, which the pass defense has just been atrocious at times. But still, even with all the flaws, there are some numbers about Alabama here that are still pretty loud and suggest this is still an elite team despite what our eyes might have shown us at times lately.
Yeah, we've talked about it a couple of times. I mean, it's this Alabama team feels different now. There's a lot of reasons for that, and we kind of Blaine kind of brought up his discussion point on that in our Alabama Mississippi State preview for this week, in terms of maybe the roster construction and those kind of things. But I keep bringing up just the penalties and the sloppiness at times. It's just not something you're used to seeing. Maybe it's more inconsistency with some of that stuff, and but still, overall, I think you have to. And I said this after the game the other night. Like, you have to remember, they have a kick to win the game to beat Tennessee. They still played really well. They gave up a lot of points, but guess what? A lot of people have given up a lot of points to Tennessee,
Yeah.
which has just an absolutely incredible offense. So I think you have to keep that in mind here, even though, look, what was it? 50, they gave up 52 as highest point total they've given up since 1907 or whatever it was for Alabama. But Tennessee's offense is just built different, as we know. And I think that is something that you have to look at. I did not come away from that Tennessee Alabama game thinking, man, boy, Alabama's in trouble. I came away thinking I just watched one of the best games I've seen in a long time. And both teams were right there making plays back and forth, back and forth. And it just so happened the team that got the ball last won the game. And so I'm not by any means going in the opposite direction on Alabama. But like I said, the schedule, though, is what it is. And they've still got some tough games on that schedule, Chris. And it's just a matter of they have to clean up some of those things penalties wise, to be able to, and defensively, that they have to clean up some of those things to be able to, I think, get where they want to go. And it's just a matter of, can this particular team do that? I still have a lot of confidence in them, but the schedule is not easy because, right, we look at their upcoming schedule, and they've got Mississippi State this week. They go to LSU. They got to go to Ole Miss. So it's a tough road ahead for the Tide.
Okay, now we get to 2-1. The Tennessee Vols are our number 2 team, which makes Georgia 1. And yeah, this was not an easy call, but you look into the numbers and there's a little bit of separation here. Now, having said this, let's recognize that Tennessee's schedule it has played has been tougher than Georgia's. Tennessee, according to Massey, number 4. According to Sagarin, number 25. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I mean, the Vols, look at this. They've won at Pitt. They beat Florida and Knoxville. Won at LSU, which I think is a top 25 level team. And then, of course, the Alabama game. Now, Ball State and Akron are awful. And so
but there's 4 top 25 wins in there in terms of where the teams were. Like Pitt was 17, Florida was 20, LSU was 25,
2 on the road,
3, and 2 on the road.
Now, Georgia's strength of schedule, Massey has it 45. Sagarin has it 55. Georgia has played Oregon, a road trip to South Carolina, which not easy, but when you're Georgia, it doesn't look like much. Road trip to Missouri got more interesting than it thought. But, I mean, you look at the teams Georgia has played. It's 3-0 in the league, and it is beaten number 11, 13, and 14. I'm sorry. It's 4 wins are against the 4 worst teams in our countdown. So let that sink in a little bit. And coming up, goodness, it plays Tennessee and it plays Kentucky. So after Tennessee, it will play the number 5 team in our rankings. Does not play Ole Miss. Does not play Alabama.
State. Goes on the road to Mississippi State too. Let's not throw that one out.
Yeah. Okay. But State is 7-0. I'm just saying that it gets
still a top
bit of a break.
Yeah.
Yeah, by not playing Georgia and Alabama. And again, it has beaten the 4 worst teams in our rankings. Now, it did destroy Oregon, which since then has gone on to be a pretty good football team, despite the 49-3 bludgeoning. But here's some numbers on Georgia. And I think here's the one that stands out. Georgia's giving up 9.1 points a game. That defense right now is in its own universe compared to the rest of the league. And is some of that strength of schedule? Yes. I'm very interested to see how this goes with Tennessee in a few weeks. Georgia has given up 247 yards. That's hands down the lowest total in the SEC. Alabama next at 296. Yards per play, Georgia giving up 4.44. That is second, actually, to Alabama, which is 4.42. Scoring margin, 32.6. That's number one in the league. Yardage margin, 279. That's number one in the league. Statistically, this is easily the most dominant team in the league. But again, I would have to suggest that the schedule has driven a lot of that. And so, we could see some differences. Meanwhile, Tennessee has given up 425 yards a game. So even though I think the Vols belong in that elite category, and again, some of that is schedule, I think that number is a little bit alarming. Tennessee +4 in turnovers, Georgia +3, both okay on special teams, neither great. Tennessee getting penalized a lot, Georgia not so much. But anyway, that's a lot of junk I threw at you. But it won't matter in a couple of weeks because these two teams will play.
They're going to play November the 5th. So if anyone has a problem one way or the other, it's going to be decided on November the 5th. But there's a couple points I want to make real quickly. Yes, like on the one hand, Georgia has, you said they've beaten the bottom four teams in our power rankings, right? And they'll have a chance to maybe beat the number 10 team, Florida, coming up when they play again next week. But they've done it, aside from the Missouri game, in decisive fashion. Like, they have been dominant, and I think that's worth value. Like, there's something about that when you dominate some teams the way that they have. So give them credit for that, and they also dominated Oregon, like we talked about. So I think there's a lot of value in that. At the same time, you look at Tennessee, and I know we can pick on their defense and the number of yards they've given up, but the thing is, like, maybe they have, but they've still outscored everybody they've played. And like we've said before the season going in, their defense does not have to be great. Their defense just has to be good enough to allow their offense to score more points than the other team. And so far, they've done that. Now, could they run into some issues the rest of the way against a Georgia that may be the defense that may be able to slow them down a bit? Sure, they could. But for now, they've managed to do it, and the yardage is what it is. But I think, there's still something impressive to what they've done offensively, and they did do it against Alabama as well, which I do think Georgia's defense is better than Alabama this season, even though we kind of looked at the numbers and you compare certain things. But I think that's pretty clear to me. So, yes, this will be debated this week. I know a lot of Tennessee fans riding the high of coming off the Alabama game. You will look at other power rankings. You will see Tennessee number one ahead of Georgia. AP poll, which we have said we don't really care about. Georgia's ahead of Tennessee. Take your pick on this. What do you value more? But I think there's no denying this fact that Tennessee has beaten four top 25 teams to this point, where they were at the time. Two of those have been on the road. They just came off of a win over, Alabama, who not long ago was number one in our power rankings. So absolutely, you can make the argument that Tennessee should be number one. But I also think there's something to the effect of, Chris, the defending national champion is Georgia, and Georgia has still done what Georgia does, even though they didn't look great against Missouri. That's the game that's going to stand out for a lot of people. You could play that game. Could Tennessee have put up 70 on Missouri? Maybe. I don't know. But, like, those are the kind of things that you think about, and you can play that game. But here's the biggest talking point, right? There's a clear number one. There's a clear number two now. And guess what, Chris? In whatever order you want to put them in, one of those teams in week 8 is not Alabama. It is now Tennessee, and it is Georgia. And that is where we are at this point, and at the midway point of the season.
Well, and look, a couple things, okay? On Georgia, Tennessee, if you want to argue resume, Tennessee clearly has the best resume of any team in the league, and probably of any in the country. That's not what we're doing. Statistical dominance, it's Georgia. Clearly. That's not exactly what we're doing either. We're trying to sort of meld the two with what our eyes tell us. And my tie break was, yes, Georgia's the reigning national champions. Now, you can say it's not the same Georgia team. And, yes, I can buy that. But it does have Stetson Bennett back. And I think, you look at the recruiting rankings year over year and what Georgia's done. There's no question about the talent here. You consider all these things, and that's, I think, why we picked Georgia number one. But, look, this is a good league, man. I think people sometimes are very quick to pass judgment on, well, this team looked terrible. Well, that might have something to do with the fact you're playing Tennessee's offense or Georgia's defense or whatever. I mean, there are right now, I think you could make the argument, 11 fairly good football teams in this league. I don't quite know on South Carolina yet, but I could leave open the possibility. You could argue Florida either way. Florida did beat Utah. I know that was a long time ago, but it did that. There's some teams we don't know what they are yet, but we said before the season, this is a brutally tough league. You look at the computers right now, I think you got 11 teams inside of most teams' top 50, most computers' top 50. You got Auburn and Missouri really not far behind that. It's a good league, man. It's an interesting league. You got drama at the top. You got parity in the middle. It is a very interesting season in the SEC, and I think when this is all said and done, we might say this was the most interesting SEC football season in a decade or two. I think that is very much on the table at this point. I think it's been a very fascinating year so far.
Well, like we said, this is a staff composite ranking, and so a lot of individual rankings go into this, and we put them all together. And I think it's always fun to see what you get, just in terms of how it shakes out. But here's something else to think about. We said, look, the AP poll is what it is, but you do have 4 of the top 7 teams in the country from the AP polls
Yeah.
perspective of, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Ole Miss right now. The composite rankings we do, the national one Chris puts together with all the computers and everything last week, you had 4 of the top 8 teams: Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Ole Miss. That order is going to flip this week, I'm sure, when we do that. But like, again, these top 4 teams right now they are something. Like, they are pretty special. And I think that we will see if that continues because, again, these teams are going to have to play each other. Alabama and Ole Miss are going to play each other. Georgia, Tennessee are going to play each other. So, you know, there's going to be a little separation there just in terms of who beats who. But still, especially these top 4 and even beyond that, we talked about a surging LSU. Kentucky may be getting back on track. I still don't think Mississippi State's a bad team. Could Arkansas get it together for a strong finish? You pointed that out, Chris. They could be a team too that kind of continues to make their move back up after kind of hitting a very difficult stretch in their schedule. A&M, there's a lot there. So yes, this is always a lot of fun each week for us to kind of look at all these rankings and different minds and what they think and to put it all together. But I still think right now with the top 2 teams, I think it's 1A, 1B, put them in whatever order you want to with Tennessee and Georgia. But what we do know is that these 2 teams are going to play in a couple weeks, and that will be the next, Chris, biggest game of the year in the SEC, perhaps. So Tennessee, by the way, still got to play Kentucky before that. So we don't want to forget that game either. So,
well, I feel like the league's best football for the most part is still to come. We've seen a lot of good football, but you got a lot of big games: Tennessee, Georgia,
Bama, Ole Miss, like those. You still have
Alabama,
those 2.
Bama, Ole
Yeah.
Miss, Bama,
So,
LSU.
yeah, that's true.
Kentucky, Tennessee. I mean, you could go on and on. So, anyway,
listen, if you enjoy SEC football, hit that subscribe button and that like button right now. We're fired up talking about these power rankings. It's been a fun season, so it's still a lot of fun to come. So,
and by the way, we attack basketball and baseball with the same passion. Yeah. So, anyway, thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button. We usually have a live stream on Wednesday night, which we may or may not have this week. Blake and I have tentatively planned to go to the Birmingham area for SEC Media Days for hoops and do some stuff down there. We got some family dynamics up in the air. We may or may not be able to do that. But either way, Wednesday will be a big content day for us. Best way to catch all that, again, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon at Southeastern 14.